I'm D. Jackson Lee, and I'm going to moderate this panel for you lucky people. We'll start with, I'll introduce each one of you to our viewers. Michelle Larkin, just a little wave, Michelle, so everybody can see. Michelle is an author of lesbian romantic thrillers. She's a long-distance runner with no sense of direction. That can be dangerous. And a nunchuck wielding sidekick to a pair of superhero sons. And that could be interesting too. Your most recent book, Michelle, is Silver and Gold, silver with a Y. There you go, Silver and Gold. Just to let you know a little bit about what that is about, Boston homicide detective Reed Silver chooses every case that comes her way. Her secret, she closes every case that comes her way. Her secret, she can talk to the dead. Reed's perfect record has earned her the freedom to work with the only partner she can tolerate, a scarred one-eye mastiff called Mugshot. I love that. The new boss saddles her with a rookie, London Gold, who is determined to learn the secret behind the success of the detective that she's idolized for years. And that sounds like a great book. I also read your book, Unexpected Partners, which I enjoyed a lot.
Thanks, Deb.
And next up is Jane Esther. Jane, give us a little wave for our audience.
Hi, Jane. Hi, Michelle.
Jane lives outside Boston with her wife, cats, and chickens. Cats and chickens, that could be touchy. She's a librarian by day and a writer by night. Her idea of a good time involves a microscope, trashy TV about the British royal family, or randomly singing Broadway show tunes, which we'll ask her to do for us later. These days, she's more likely to be found playing video games than writing, but such as the pandemic life, we all know about that. Her most recent book is called Convergence. It's book 2 in the Portal series. Here you go, Convergence. But I'm going to read you a little bit about book 1, which is called Uninvited, because you might want to read Uninvited. I started in with Convergence and then decided I wanted to read Uninvited first. So Uninvited starts with, and tell me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Erin, spelled differently, the Scottish way, McLeary experienced an ominous vibration that shocks her entire body, and afterwards she discovers she can read minds and has an extreme sensitivity to sound. So she seeks out her best friend and her first love, Professor Olivia Ando, is that how you pronounce it? To figure out what happened. Well, Olivia's not so happy to see Erin again because they'd been lovers and it was a disastrous breakup, but she can't resist the great research challenge, especially when they figure out that Erin's body has become the host for an alien being. That could be interesting too. And the name of that book, Uninvited. Her first book was The Universe Between Us. Ileandra Young, with that beautiful accent. Always wanted an accent, because we know that I don't have one.
I don't have an accent, you have an accent.
Yeah, there you go. Ileandra Young writes urban and traditional fantasy, watching the moon at night and dreaming up new supernatural creatures to let loose on her characters. When not writing, she can be found LARPing, and we'll get her to explain that later if our audience doesn't know what that is, or playing video games with her twin sons. Oh,
yeah,
more sons there. Her most recent book, Moon Fever, is book 2 in the SPEAR, and that's an abbreviation, SPEAR, Mission File Series. SPEAR stands for Supernatural Prohibition, Extermination, and Arrest Regiment. She's recent, Danica Carson
Mhm.
Am I pronouncing that right?
Danica?
Well, the American way.
No. She'll
Close enough.
probably answer to all of it, to be honest. She'll
Yeah.
answer to Oi, so, you know.
Is tasked with containing a new pack of werewolves who are endangering humans and falsely implicating a dear friend, an alpha of the dire wolf pack. Now, we all love dire wolves if you're a Game of Thrones fan like me.
Yeah.
She enlists the help of her girlfriend, Rain, who's a fellow agent, and a powerful vampire. Now, Danica is human, right? Is she human?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but she has a vampire girlfriend. Unfortunately,
Yes.
while they're trying to take care of these werewolf pack that's gotten out of hand, the full moon is approaching, and that threatens to subvert their mission and consume Rain and Danica in a wave of passion and blood. That sounds sexy. Okay. All right. So we still don't have, Karen hasn't popped in. She may be having internet trouble. And last but not least, Genevieve McClure. That's Scottish?
Irish.
There's Karen. Irish. I should know that, where my ancestors are from, believe it or not. You can tell by my accent, right? But, okay, Genevieve, native Californian, but lives in Arizona with her partner in cats, working away on far too many novels. Oh, where'd you go? There you go. A cat. Yeah. She bases her, she's obsessed with mythology and bases her stories on those myths. In her free time, she pesters the cats, plays video games, and attempts to be better at archery. So don't mess with her. She'll shoot you with her arrows. Her most recent book is Olivia. And okay, this hooked me. When I read this first sentence in the blurb, I was hooked right away. How does a centuries-old vampire suffering from severe PTSD take her parrot to the vet? What vampire do you know has a parrot for a vet? A parrot for a pet, and she needs to take her to the vet, but she has an intense fear of humans, so she doesn't, she didn't want to take her, she didn't want to go to the vet. So, so she needs therapy to be able to go to the vet, and she meets veterinarian Mia's son, who knows all about being damaged, and she and Olivia slowly build a friendship that develops into something more until a figure from Olivia's past surfaces. Okay, you might have read her first book that's been out for a little while, My Date with a Wendigo. Is that right?
Wendigo.
Wendigo. Okay, all right. And Karen has joined us. Hi, Karen.
I have to apologize for being a moment late, but I just, and for my speech possibly, because I had a little Novocaine a little while ago for a dental procedure. Actually, a lot of Novocaine. I don't want to start singing the Weekend song. I can't feel my face when I'm with you. It's Novocaine, not cocaine, unfortunately.
Maybe we'll get you to sing.
So if I sound a little off, I'm not drunk or anything. I'm just, no.
Keep these Broadway tunes for us later. We'll get you joined in with Jane. Okay, so I was doing introductions. You're last.
Okay.
You tuned in just the right time.
Good.
Karen lives between New York City and rural Massachusetts with her partner, 3 cats, several dogs, and a couple of turtles. She comes to us tonight from the Berkshires, where she does most of her writing, where she shares her land with the resident coyotes who inspired her latest novel, Coyote Blues, which I enjoy very much.
Thank you.
Coyote Blues, to tell you a little bit about that book, a foundling adopted by wealthy parents, Riley Dawson learns 2 things about herself as soon as she makes it through puberty. She's a weird coyote, and she's in love with Fiona Bell, an evangelical preacher's daughter. This discovery doesn't go well. Fiona's parents take her away, and Riley's parents pack her off to college a short time later and make it clear they don't want to see her again. 20 years later, Riley is a psychotherapist in a lucrative therapy practice when Fiona Bell comes back into her life and Riley's world is turned upside down. It's a very interesting book.
You
I've read
can
it.
imagine.
I enjoyed it. I also enjoyed your earlier book, As the Crow Flies. Lots
Thank
of
you.
twists and turns in that plot. We have with us 5 very interesting writers and very interesting. So the first question I want everybody to answer. How old were you when you realized that you were weird? I mean, you were infected. You were infected with wild imaginings. Jane, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think that I've always sort of liked watching sort of sci-fi stuff on TV. But in terms of like writing, I entered a library short story contest when I was, I think, like 16 or 17. And I wrote a story about a girl who like realized she was a robot or something like that. And it was the stupidest little thing. I basically just wrote it because I wanted the prize, which was a CD. And I won because I think only probably 2 people were that interested in the library. But that's sort of the beginning of my like weirdness with stories. I thought it was totally normal to write about a robot girl. So, yeah.
Very cool. Michelle?
So I think I was 6. I wrote my first book, and it was a very short book, but it was called Jack and the Orange. And I think that's when it started for me. The orange was a giant orange, and it took out the entire town, and the only survivor was Jack, and he was a stick figure. So I did the illustrations for the book, and I wrote it. Yeah, so that's when it all started for me.
Did your parents think that was strange?
You know what? My mom actually kept the book, and she still has it to this day. So I don't know. Go figure.
That's interesting. Leandra, how about you?
I pretty much knew I was weird from the second I started connecting with other kids. The wild imaginings part, though, 11, 12, it was early secondary school, I know that for sure. And because I was weird, I didn't really hang out with the other girls and guys in my classes, so I spent most of my lunch times in the library testing out the new computers. What is this, Windows 95? So I spent a lot of time doing that and writing out stories. I wish I could remember a few of them, but I can't. It's too far gone. But that it was then secondary school, early secondary school, playing with the new computers, realizing that I could write stories and keep them on these things. It was them.
Genevieve?
Well, I certainly always knew I was weird, but for writing, I guess it's also kind of an always thing. I don't really have one big story. I just always really enjoyed it and spent so much of my time just thinking up stories and occasionally even writing them down.
Karen, how about you? Did you write?
Well, yeah, I always did. I wrote, like vampire stuff. I was also, I'm dating myself, but I was big into like Archie and those romance comics. So I used to write a little, romances and stuff like that. But I think I realized I was into wild imaginings, or I should say my parents realized it when report cards started coming in from my first grade teacher with comments like, Karen masters classroom material, but she tends to doodle and daydream a lot, So I guess my mind was always on more fantastical things, like the urban fantasies I currently write. but I guess, Deb, that we're all born with an innate psychological desire for wild imaginings, if you will, and that probably traces back to our early ancestors. Even before stories were being recorded, you can just imagine like primitive people sitting around a campfire, a fire to keep the predators away, and someone saying, tell me a story. We love storytelling, and storytellers have always been very important, people, and held important positions throughout history.
I find that really, I find
And also, I think when it comes to speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, that there are certain personality types that probably are drawn more to it, whether it's in the writing or the reading of them. But I think probably we tend to be, both writers and readers of spec fic, that we tend to be more intuitive, creative, and curious people. And we just enjoy stories that are foregrounded by those fantastical elements, stories that sort of invite us to sit on the edge of the ordinary world, on that curve, and just peer into the endless realm of possibilities.
That's a good way of putting it. We're not weird, we're special.
Yeah. Enlightened.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I've got a few questions. I'm going to aim specifically at different people. Okay, when you sit down to start a new scene, how do you do it? Do you see it in your head like a movie first? Do you pause and decide whose POV you're going to start that chapter in, or that scene? Or you just sit down and just start writing? How about Genevieve? How do you do that?
I just put some music on and let it flow. I usually have a pretty solid idea for what's going to happen, so I just need to put words on page and see how it ends up coming out.
So you don't work with an outline or anything? You just start writing and...
No, I have an outline. I mean, for most of my books, at least, I have a fairly detailed outline for like what each chapter is going to contain. I've been having to make a few changes, but just I have the whole thing set out after a few chapters in, and then just start writing each scene and let it happen how it's going to happen.
Okay. What about you, Jane?
Yeah, I also definitely have an outline. If I just sat down and started writing, I would just sit there with nothing coming out. So I sort of try to like at least generally outline the book and then outline each chapter, and then I'll sit down and be like, I usually just write a chapter at a time every time I sit down to write. But yeah, I sort of learned that the hard way without having an outline really for my first book, The Universe Between Us, until partway through. And then I had to go back and just like outline everything kind of after I had written it, just to kind of like make it all seem okay. And it was a lot more work than if I had just done it in the first place. So that's what I do now.
Stick pretty much to your outline. You don't ever have your characters like run away with the book.
I'll just change the outline if that happens.
Okay. Anybody else want to grab that question? Feel compelled to answer that?
I don't have an outline of my books. I have sort of a brief synopsis, so I know the big picture. But chapter by chapter, I kind of let my characters just carry me through. So you guys sound very organized, and I don't think I'm very organized. I'm disciplined, but like I have a word quota that I have to hit every day, and it's 1,500 words. So I'm curious to find out if anybody has a word quota. I know that works for me. And I just sit down. I'm I work out my scenes during my runs because I have that time to think. And then I really just let the characters kind of carry me along. I see it as I write it. So there's not a whole lot of planning that goes into it for me, except that word quota.
Not me.
Really.
No, to me, it's like if I can write 3 good pages a day, 1 paragraph, if it's great, and I've rewritten it 100 times, and it's just what I feel like this is what I want. It doesn't matter, how many words, because even if I had a word quota, I'd probably end up rewriting it and going through 5 more drafts anyway, So.
Does anybody have a word quota? I was just curious.
Well, I was going to say, Michelle, it's really
There we
funny
go.
because judging by your background, you're extremely organized.
Organized, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, like, me, not so much.
Well,
And Ileandra, not so much.
the chaos of my office. Funnily enough,
So
though,
any
when
of
I am
you,
very organized.
you ever act out any of your scenes, or block them or act them out? And I see Ileandra, nodding. You'll explain to us what LARPing is.
Actually, LARPing is quite helpful. Okay, LARPing is live action role play. So think of it like a play, I suppose. Usually in the woods, but you don't have a script. You have your character concept, and then you play off your character concept against the people around you. And usually the LARP team will have some plot. So things will happen to you. Things will attack you in the night. You'll get shot, all sorts. But I guess it's another form of storytelling. So I'm used to being physical when I'm telling story. I mean, hang on. I'm used to being physical when I tell stories, and I get to play with stuff like this. This is a staff, which is huge.
Oh,
it's like
cool.
6 feet long, by the way. So I do get quite physical when I plan my scenes. But my scenes are planned. I outlined within an inch of my life. I know exactly what's happening, which is really interesting because sometimes my characters do run off with me within my outline, and I have to chase them down. It's like, no, stop it, come back, please, don't do that. Happens particularly with Danica and her mother, actually. All of their interactions it's a bit weird how they go nuts. But yeah, particularly with an action sequence, and there's quite a few of those because, guns and vampires and whatnot, I see it. So there's a lot of me doing when I'm writing, which really confuses my partner, poor thing. It's like, what are you doing? I'm working, honest. Honestly, I'm working. So I see it first, and then I try and write it. And if it doesn't make sense when I'm writing it, I'll try and do it. Danica is fitter than me and far more physically skilled. However, if she's trying to do something that I can't do, maybe she can't do it. Maybe. So it's important for me to kind of double check that. She can do roundhouse kicks and flying kicks and elbow jabs and all the rest of it. I can't, but I know that they're possible. So all of that fun stuff goes in when I'm building up a scene.
So if you're having a hard time, like sometimes when I sit down to write, the words just seem laborious, and then other times they really flow. If you're having a hard time, like it's just not working that day, you're having a hard time getting into the flow, does it help if you dress up like a character or something? You ever try that?
I've never done that, but now I want to. I mean, Danica, her style is, she's got a kind of classic.
What about Genevieve? What do you think? Would you ever tried that?
You should.
Those eyes, no? No?
The closest I've ever done was I tried using a Yggdrasil pendant while I was working on a Norse mythology story, and then immediately lost it.
Oh no.
Okay, we have a question from attendee. do you ever base your characters off actual people and toss them into fantastical situations?
Absolutely.
Who said absolutely?
Karen.
Karen, tell us about that.
Yeah, all the time. You know, I think most of my characters are, you know, composite people. Just, you know, people I meet along the way, friends, acquaintances. Sometimes I'll even be out and just, I don't know, see a woman and say, oh my God, like, yeah, that's who I was imagining or something, you know? So, sure, they're all real people. You know, I always say that half of our fiction is really autobiographical. You know, we just kind of scramble all the facts and truths in with the fantasy.
It's I think that works.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Michelle and Eliandra, do you ever, how does being a mom influence your writing?
Go for it.
No,
Yeah, I'll
go
let Ileandra answer first.
Oh, okay. Well, for those of you who were here right at the start, you would have seen my boys wandering in. The main influence that has on my writing is that I'm tired more. So I'll go to something the next day and I'll be like, did I actually write that? That's actually okay. I like this. That's rubbish, but this is good. You know, so I have actually come to a manuscript the next day and not recognized a single word I've written, probably because I'm either having half a conversation while I'm trying to do it, or I was just so tired that I forgot. But I don't know, I do think a little more carefully about how I write my characters now. Obviously, there are good guys and bad guys, and then there's the entire spectrum in between. But I sometimes think, is this a real person? Is this someone that my kids might meet? Is this the sort of person that I would want my children to meet? Or is this the sort of person I want my kids to grow into, you know? And they don't guide me exactly, but they're questions that pop up every now and then while I'm working, which never used to before I had children.
Mm-hmm. Michelle?
I understand the tired part. That I can relate to for sure. So I wake up every morning, usually between 4 and 5, just to get my 2 hours of writing in before my youngest wakes up. So, but I've gotten used to that, and I'm not tired. I have my coffee, and I'm good to go. But I think the way that being a mom has impacted my writing the most has been humor. So I have 2 sons. One just turned 11, and my youngest is 3, just getting ready to turn 4.
Oh.
My oldest guy is by far the funniest person I've ever met in my life. He's so funny. We laugh a lot, and he's got a gift. So I think having that experience with him and seeing his sense of humor mature as he grows older has really made me appreciate humor more. And I have this sort of this need to incorporate that in my books, in the stories, in the characters, particularly with dialogue and action scenes, you know. So humor, that would be, yeah.
So it adds an element to your writing.
That may not have been there, or may not have been there as often. Yeah, I just lucked out with a really funny kid.
Karen, what's your favorite element of writing? Is it developing characters, or constructing a twisty plot, or building tension?
I like it all. I love developing characters, but you know, the most important thing is plot. You know, without a plot, there's no story, even if you have great characters and ideas for great places and settings and so forth. So the most wonderful thing is when the plot comes to you, and I just always liken it to a Rubik's Cube, and you're just twisting and twisting, and finally, one day it just all clicks and it's there, and it's energizing. But and sometimes, it depends what the story is about. Like I've gotten inspiration from objects. Like one of my earlier urban fantasies, I happened to be perusing an antique shop in the Catskills, New York, with a bunch of friends, and I walked in and I saw this, in this lighted curio cabinet was this beautiful, very feminine and dainty servant's bell from the 1800s. And it just struck me, and all of a sudden the voice in my head said, "Ring and she will come," and that was it. And I walked out of the store with the bell and with a plot for this enchanted bell in which a fairy has been imprisoned for 100 years. And I just had to figure out, who my main character will be and how she'll come into possession of the bell and so forth, So sometimes it's just really quick. And I find that I don't really write with an outline, but as long as I have my ending, and that's how I usually start. If I have the ending and I know what has to happen in the middle to get to that ending, then the rest will fall into place, the beginning, the characters, and so forth.
What about Jane? How about do you start? What starts your idea for a story? Is it a character or an object or a plot or?
So for both of the stories that I've written, The Uninvited and Convergence being one story, I have started with totally different stories, but the same characters. So for Uninvited, I started off like completely differently, not even about aliens, just nothing. So I start with the characters, and I have this like sort of little idea for a story that I've thought of, and I probably write some of it down. And then over the next like couple of months, I'll be like, oh my God, but what if they go to Mars? What if there are aliens? It just all kind of comes from that. But the characters never change, which I don't know if that's weird, but the characters always stay the same. They're the same people, just in a completely different situation. And I would also like to know, I always like stalk photos on the internet, just like random people that I find, and I'm like, yes, this character looks like that person, and I save it, and then I go back and look at it. So there's this like, I don't even know, this like therapist in somewhere in middle America that's like on my computer. You're my character.
So characters are very important to you in building a story. Genevieve, how about for you? What element of this story that usually is the seed for your idea?
It really depends. Like for Wendigo and Olivia, it was very much the plot first, and well, characters are generally my favorite part to work on. They really came later. But for my next book, I just really wanted to write a story about Sorority Girl 4.
All right, you have let's see, you have a book coming out that's on pre-order now. Thor, was that yours?
Yeah, in January. It's
Daughter of Asgard.
Yeah, just really wanted to write Thor being a sorority girl.
That's going to be interesting too. I'm looking forward to reading that one. For everybody, if you could be any one of your characters, who would you want to be? We'll start with Jane.
Oh boy. I'm gonna go with Anna Mitchell from The Universe Between Us, because she She is pretty awesome. She is a scientist, and she has this like amazing greenhouse garden, and she had a chance to go to Mars. And she also gets to date Jolie, who, like, I'd rather be Anna because I want to date Jolie. I find her very attractive. Anyway, that is my answer.
Okay, Leandra, who would you want to be? You'd want to be Danica, wouldn't you?
Well, that's kind of my knee jerk. That's my knee jerk thought, really. Danica's so cool. I mean, I would love to be able to do the flying kicks, the roundhouse kicks, the elbow strikes. And what sometimes happens when I write a character is I give them elements that I'd like to have myself. The whole her physical prowess, as you like, I feel like, is something that I aspire to myself. But I don't know if I'd want to be her exactly, because some of the relationships with her family, they're not great, and her past wasn't particularly great. I was mean to her. Very mean to her. And if I think about my own cushy, cozy life, I've had a way easier time than she has. Even if she does have a smoking hot girlfriend. So it's actually quite similar to you, Jane. I'd probably end up picking Rain so I could date Danica, because that feels safer than being her.
Yeah.
She's got it rough. I'd rather be the vampire and date the human.
Okay, Genevieve, who would you be?
Well, I don't tend to make my characters things that I want to be. I tend to give them more of my worst attributes. So the ones that are currently out, like, I'm mostly Mia, but I don't want to be more like Mia. That sounds exhausting. I would be so misanthropic. In my upcoming book, I would definitely be Alice, because shapeshifting is the best power.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yes,
Amen.
yeah, that's cool, but it's kind of painful though, isn't it? I mean,
Not when it's magic.
yeah, okay. Karen, who would you be?
Well, I'm going to have to read a passage from Coyote Blues. So yeah, the main character is a shapeshifter, a were-coyote, and I think most authors, we usually see ourselves in the role of protagonist, but considering my affinity with animals, I'm also a wildlife rehabilitator. I just love trying to get into the mind of a coyote and imagine what it would be like to be one. And really, wouldn't it be sublime to actually experience that, to know what our cats and dogs and birds, think, how they feel, how they experience the world, their perspective on all sorts of things. So, and anyone who has animals knows that they know a lot more than we give them credit for. And I just, God, just being surrounded by them my whole life, I'm convinced that somehow they experience life with a certain resolve and certainty that totally eludes us humans. So in this passage, I can get it on this. This is from kind of earlier in the book, but Riley had spent so many years loathing this lycanthropic affliction that denied her a normal life, ideally a life with Fiona Bell, that she often failed to appreciate the glory of the transformation. But Tom was right. It was exhilarating, this raw strength and power, this incongruous state of being elevated to a lower life form, if that made any sense. There was an exaltation in the lessening, a paradox only another shapeshifter could understand. Not that she knew any, but it would have been nice to exchange notes with someone who understood what it was like to transcend the wrappings of humanity. She stood in the driveway and gave herself a good shake, shedding those wrappings like a dog shaking off the rain. And then she took off, moving swiftly through the tall grass of the old cow pastures, determined to find out what the hell was going on inside that farmhouse. And of course, in that farmhouse is Riley's long-lost true love, who is now the mother of a 10-year-old girl and the wife of an abusive husband. And then there's another scene, just in terms of capturing the animal mind. It happens later in the book, while Riley is contemplating murder, actually. And she decides to pay a visit to the mysterious Reverend Cortez, who sort of reminds her of a young Antonio Banderas. He's the Reverend of a Presbyterian church. And of course, Presbyterians welcome the LGBT community. And he's trying to get her to attend a session or a sermon rather. But aside from like the issue of homosexuality, Riley, being half human and half coyote, is totally turned off by the Judeo-Christian belief that animals don't have souls. So the Reverend tells her that, well, you know, the Bible, Riley, like the Constitution, is subject to interpretation. And he cites a scripture that implies that animals do have souls. And he says that he believes that animals, you know, all possess a consciousness and that they're quietly cognizant of a higher power. They may not actively contemplate the meaning of life as we do, he says, but in the silence of their souls is an awareness of a greatness, vast and deep. And when Riley hears him say that she thinks to herself, yes, this is exactly what she experienced in fur. No matter what she was doing, listening to the wind, running with the pack, sprawled in a starlit field, she was always aware of an indefinable but settling truth, a universal principle of greatness that was, yes, vast and deep. It was hard for her coyote brain to translate the particulars to her human mind, impossible to effectively put into words. The logistics and linguistics were complicated. But when she walked on all fours, that universal truth was there inside her, connecting her to something greater. She could only describe it as a strange sort of knowing that you know something, yet not quite understanding what it is you know, or even how you came to know it, just that you do. That's how it felt. Kind of like the canine equivalent of a Buddhist achieving nirvana. So there you have it. Those were my vicarious mental workings of a were-coyote.
So you would like to be a were-coyote?
Yes. Absolutely. In a heartbeat.
Okay, Michelle, how about you? Do you want to be able to talk to the dead?
Yes and no, I guess. I think that would be challenging to do every day. I think it would be a toss-up. I definitely would not want to be Chloe from Unexpected Partners, or Dana, really, for that matter. Though they were, really strong women, and I admired them for that. I think I would choose also a shapeshifter, Aspen Wolf from Endangered.
Yeah.
She was a special kind of shapeshifter. She was called a myriad, and she could shift into any animal at will, whereas other shapeshifters could only shift into their primary animal, just one animal. So I think it would be fun. I think it would be a lot of fun to be able to shift into anything, a bird, a lion. That would be pretty neat. So
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's that would be interesting. We have a question from our audience. If you've killed a character, has it emotionally hurt, or were you happy to be rid of them? Has anybody killed a character before? Killed one of your characters? You're all murderers.
Yeah.
Genevieve, who have you killed?
Well, other than a villain, no one in any of my currently out books, so I'd rather not spoil anything. But
Okay.
it's dependent on the characters. Sometimes it's, quite relieving. Other times I've actually cried.
Yeah, I understand. I have a couple of my books where there's scenes that I will never read in a reading because I would choke up my way all the way through them. And I wrote them, and I still can't. can't possibly do it. Eliandra, who have you killed?
Spoilers. I can't give it away, but I don't like killing off characters, but sometimes the story takes itself that way, you know. So it either takes itself that way or it needs that inciting incident. And it's horrible to think about it that way, but sometimes something as final as a death is the only way to spur your characters on to do what they need to do. But even if it's a small character, because of the way I outline, every character that speaks has, I call it a Bible, they have their own Bible. So I know these characters, I know what their favorite bands are, how they like to dress, I know their favorite colors, I know their birthdays. So I get really upset when one of them dies, because it's a bit like losing a friend. Or losing an acquaintance, maybe if it's a smaller character, but I still feel it when I lose a character. And it does feel like a loss. When I know I'm not going to be writing about that character anymore.
Well, Jane, you kill a lot of people in your books. Do a lot of people die?
I do.
In Convergence?
I don't think so. No, I don't think. Okay. No spoilers, so I'm not going to answer that question.
Okay, all right.
I'm nice.
Okay. Okay, we don't want to do any spoilers. And Michelle, there's okay. If your detective can talk to the dead, has she ever talked to end up talking to somebody she knows? I mean, that would be really weird.
Well,
and emotional, I would think.
yeah, she's been doing it her whole life, though. So she's, she's pretty experienced. She's gotten good at what she does, and I think she's also very good at categorizing emotions, if you will. Sort of filing them away in a box for later. So, yeah, without spoiling hopefully much, there's a scene in the very beginning of the book where she loses her captain, and they were very close. She and her captain had a long-standing professional and somewhat personal relationship, and she ends up losing him, and he does make an appearance later in the book. So that was a lot of fun to write about. He makes an appearance, of course, as a spirit, and communicates with her. And it sounds so far-fetched and really kind of out there, but it's not. It's pretty cut and dry for her. She's very black or white, and what you see is what you get. So she just kind of deals with things head on. And so if that's the long answer to your short question.
Well, I gotta say, every one of your books sound so interesting. I'd have to sit down, if I went in the middle of moving and then have a deadline myself that Sandy's graciously extended for me because of all of my sudden moving and everything, I would be staying up all night reading your latest books, because I do love to read the other authors and keep up as much as I can. And I do love fantasy. Well, thank you very much, ladies. You were all very interesting. Your books are incredible. I've read some of all of your books, and can recommend to all of our readers that they need to buy them and read them. Fantasy and sci-fi and people that can talk to the dead are so interesting. And thanks very much for being on our panel.
Yeah. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your Goldie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.